Welcome to episode 312 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. We're going to talk about mail today, measuring mail to be precise. In a moment, I'm joined by Mark Cross, Engagement Director at JICmail, and Christopher Thresher-Andrews, Research Director at Kantar. It's not just about measuring the effectiveness of mail. The statistics will surprise you. It's also about unlocking new capabilities of mail. So coming up in just a moment, we're going to talk about the data that backs up the value of mail. Joining me on the line are Mark Cross. Mark is Engagement Director at JICmail, and Christopher Thresher-Andrews, who's Research Director at Kantar. Welcome to you both. We're going to get stuck into a meaty discussion about direct mail, but I suppose direct mail, but not as we knew it, I suppose, Mark. Well, can you just set us up with a bit of background here, please, Mark? Tell us a bit about why this approach has been taken to set up a JIC when it comes to measuring direct mail. I suppose I should ask, what is a JIC, by the way?
So JIC stands for the Joint Industry Currency for Mail. And it's basically got its cousins in all other channels. So when you think about TV ratings, most people are familiar with the concept of were the ratings up or down, and the BARB ratings. Well, BARB is the audience measurement system for TV. And that's mirrored in other channels. So radio has it, outdoor has it. Every channel had it except direct mail. That wasn't until we came along in 2018. Many would argue that actually mail is such a substantial channel, and obviously from an advertising point of view, but obviously also as a customer business mail point of view, there was no audience measurement equivalent underpinning that channel. And it was very, very much driven by the operations and delivery requirements, logistics of the channel, which is perfectly understandable, very driven by getting the mail in through people's letterboxes and the volumes required to do that and so on. Less understanding of actually what happened when the letters land on the doormat. How do actually people in the household interact with their mail, and could we possibly measure it? So it does actually it's not an easy thing to measure, firstly, so that's one reason for the delay. But there was a very excellent piece of research called The Private Life of Mail a few years ago, which actually established a methodology that could be used to develop our BARB equivalent for mail. And I'm really pleased to say that the powers that be saw this opportunity. It was a huge effort to deliver consistent, in effect, audience and item measurement into the households of the UK as a bit of a global first. No one had done this in another market. And that, as I say, that was in 2018. So curiously, we're in a situation where, again, in a sort of marketing and media sense, the people we were trying to engage with were very familiar with their BARB ratings and their radio ratings. They were pretty unfamiliar with direct mail, because often so much of the delivery and the fulfillment of mail was happening through other groups beyond the conventional media agencies in particular. On the other hand, all the supply chain, the mailing houses, the access operators, and the specialists involved in the delivery of mail were very unfamiliar with audience measurement data. So putting the two together was really the essential challenge to kind of demonstrate the value of this data, both to the existing operations of the industry and to the critical agency world who are making the decisions about the money to invest into the different channels. And obviously in a very complex world, a digitally driven world, mail was getting forgotten about. Mail was a bit of a blind spot for that audience, who were extremely important to kind of give them data that was comparable, that was trusted, that was accepted as a basis of planning budgets. So hence the need for a joint industry currency. And I should say that the key thing about that is actually we're owned by the industry. So JICmail is not owned by Royal Mail. It's not owned by any one group. It's owned by both the buy side of the industry. So that will be people like the agencies and the advertisers, and it's owned by the supply side. So we have representation on our board from Royal Mail, of course, but also people like Whistle. So it's actually a not-for-profit. It's owned by the industry, it's governed by the industry, and me as engagement director run the program into that board. So again, it's quite a powerful status, and it's a really critical thing to understand why our data is so important. Is because it's accepted by all sides of the industry. No methodology, no research is perfect. It all has its limitations. How you measure those spots for TV advertising has limitations. And of course, we've got a great methodology, but it has its limitations too. But in the real world, we've got to help inform people make better kind of planning, buying decisions when it comes to spending advertising money in particular. And I would say that we also somewhat, I think, need to kind of work a bit harder on is demonstrating the value also of the business mail we're capturing, because we don't just capture advertising mail. So that's one of the preconceptions we've always had to deal with, is actually we're the only source of, beyond the actual data of advertisers' use of business mail or brand use of business mail, is that we cover that sector as well. So we're spanning an awful lot of revenue into the postal sector.
Now, as a very fresh organisation back in 2018, I imagine there would have been a few challenges getting it all up and running. So can you just share a little bit about what the challenges were for the team as it got underway, and then what you've learned from 5 years of, it's 5 years now, isn't it? 5 years of this of analysis and research.
Yeah, so I think my role was actually to get people, having delivered the data, and the data, as Christopher will explain, gets refreshed every quarter, was to get people to, Mark, can you get people to use it, please? It was basically my one-line brief. So actually the biggest challenges are all about usage, about understanding the limitations of people in terms of their routines, that their everyday routines, which we all know, incredibly time pressure, time poor. How can we get people to understand and access and use this data in a way that drives value for their businesses? So we did have a big think about that and came up really with sort of 4 pillars, which have been with us since day one. So firstly, there's a whole education piece. So we need people to understand how we capture this data, what it stands for, what the benefits are of this data. And that's for anyone, wherever you sit in the supply chain, in the agency world, as an advertiser. So we've got to cover all the stakeholders and educate them. We've also got to inspire them. So we've got to bring to life the data. It's all very well sending them a big spreadsheet with data in, but actually it's not very inspiring. So again, a big part of our role, beyond making sure that the data is up to the standards of being a JIC, was to inspire people about using it, and also to create demonstrating that there were groups who were using it. So even for those that weren't using it, from day one, we wanted to champion those that were. So kind of normalizing, creating a sense that actually it's normal to use this data in a way that it is in other channels, but not in mail. So normalizing it for mail was really quite important, which is more about giving a sense of creating example showcases of what good looks like. And then critically making it very accessible, making it easy to use. So we had to create our own portal for accessing the data. It was going through other sort of software systems, which would be the standard systems for access through systems, planning systems like Telmar and IMS and so on, again, which only the media agency users will really be familiar with. So yeah, all of that had to happen, but we've stuck by those 4 pillars since day one. Everything we've done has fitted under one of those pillars. So we're a small team. It's quite a task, but we've been really consistent and really clear about how we've gone about what is a journey. So it's ultimately a kind of journey over time, bit of a cliche, but true when it comes to actually people's behaviours and how they use data, getting confidence about using the data, getting habitual about using the data. All of that really key for us on the outset, and just step by step, doing it kind of consistently and with clarity, I think.
Now, we've talked a lot about sort of this concept of measuring mail behaviours and taking a more, what would you call it, disciplined and investigative approach. Can you tell us a bit about the methodology? I mean, Christopher perhaps might want to answer this one. And tell us a bit about the methodology and about how, and also why we've survived this long without measuring direct mail. Why start now?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's probably a good point to start and actually understand why. I think it's actually particularly important because we understand marketing from lots of different channels. And as Mark discussed, we have TV measurement and radio measurement. So advertisers and their agencies can understand the impact of those campaigns on their purchases, on their outcomes. They can see where their money is going and the effectiveness that's driving. But agencies, and again, their advertisers, they're going to find it hard to justify the inclusion of mail in campaigns when there's really no, genuine cross-channel measurement of its effectiveness. It seems that money just gets poured into other areas. And obviously, with increasing digital channels, it's going to be much harder for an advertiser to justify spending on what is seen perhaps as a more expensive channel or a more old-fashioned or less reliable channel. So direct mail faces kind of significant challenges from those different medias. And it's all about understanding that actually direct mail needs defending. It is the only media guaranteed to reach that household that you target. And, we see in the way in which Google ads, for example, in digital channels, they tend to take credit for the purchase journey with something called last click attribution. The idea is that if you went to Google before you made a purchase on that website, then Google claims that that's what's driven that action. Whereas actually, perhaps they received a catalog through the mail 3 weeks ago that they've read and studied carefully, made a purchase decision, but none of that journey was being captured. So direct mail, therefore, needs challenging and defending. And I think that's why something like an organization like JICmail has such value. When it comes to measuring those mail behaviors, it needs a custom solution. It's quite tricky. It's not quite so easy as perhaps measuring TV behavior, for example, where you can recruit people to install a little box and measure what they're watching on the screen. So for us, when it came to developing the methodology, we kind of built a custom diary-based platform with a mobile app attached to it. The idea being is essentially we're capturing mail behaviors as close to the moment as possible. So we ask a range of just over 1,000 panelists, and we recruit those panelists from lots of different demographic backgrounds to make sure that we're actually capturing a full spectrum of mail behaviors across different household sizes and other panel demographics. We ask them to take a photo of the mail that comes in. And as Mark said, it's not just your direct mail, your leaflets and your catalogs and door drops. It's all your business mail as well. And then essentially, it's just about recording any actions that they take with those pieces of mail over a 4-week period. Those behaviors are an important part of the mail picture. And so predominantly that's done on an online basis. But actually, we added an offline panel to our overall methodology, which I don't think seems to happen very much in the modern world. If we think about mail behaviors and the type of households who perhaps interact with mail the most, they are likely to be people who don't have access or comfort, let's say, with using online banking, and digital platforms. So we wanted to make sure that we got a complete picture of mail behavior from the most population that we could find. So we actually, for 10% of our panel, they actually complete an offline paper-based diary to record their mail behaviors in that way as well. And what we think this does is actually ensures our data represents a true picture of the media, and obviously making sure that we capture all of those unique direct mail behaviors. And I think ultimately evidence is essential in being able to preserve your direct mail revenues. And in this current marketplace where marketing spend is being squeezed, people default to digital spend because it seems to be integrated into a platform. They can see the effects, but are they real? That's a different question entirely. Whereas mail obviously now has its boxing gloves on and is ready to fight back and defend itself in this crowded media marketplace.
You were talking really then about the value in measuring it as well. It's sort of not you're talking not just about the why measure it, but also the value that we can derive. So it's almost like you're squeezing more out of the lemon in that respect. So can you share a little bit about the insights that the research has revealed so far?
Yeah, I think as Mark said, the JICmail has been producing data for 5+ years now. And I think some of the consistent insights that we've driven have actually maintained over that period. So a good example to start with is just a basic engagement metric. Out of all the mail delivered in the households, how much is actually engaged with some form of physical interaction? And that number is, in the last results published for Q1 was 95%. 95% of mail had some form of physical interaction from consumers, other than just being immediately thrown away. So as an engagement level, you compare that to any other channel, that is incredibly high. And what that does is that engagement then leads to better returns for advertisers, because when we look at what we call the commercial actions, so that's a visit to a website, that's a discussion with a household member about making a big purchase, that is purchase behavior itself. Any of those commercial actions, around 30% of the mail prompts those actions from consumers making a purchase, redeeming a voucher, visiting the website, but also visiting in store. So mail is actually creating not only digital effects and driving website and online purchases, but it's also increasing store footfall into traditional retail environments as well. So some of those, at the very basic level, when you measure engagement, producing some really interesting data. But what you can do is you break that down further and understand, okay, what other effects is mail having on other elements like brand awareness, and what again we call what's called the purchase funnel, essentially a series of behaviors that's driving people to make that purchase. And mail is contributing to those effects. Predominantly, I think, because mail is still live in the home after a long period. If it's not immediately thrown away, which we've actually found, most mail is processed, displayed in the home, which is a particularly powerful connection to a consumer. It's not just read or thrown away immediately, put on display, sometimes in the sitting room or in the kitchen predominantly. So there's context behaviors as well to consider when you're trying to target new consumers. But around 44% of the mail is still live in the home after that 28 days that we measure. So there's multiple opportunities then for exposure and brand building. We know it drives digital actions as well as physical in-store ones. And, 30, 31, 35% in some cases, if we look at the most recent data, items are prompting some sort of commercial action. So if we think about mail as a channel, now that we can prove its effectiveness, it's actually demonstrating it punches well above its weight in many categories. I think the last little bit of information I found was really interesting, and then I'll ask Mark his opinion on some of the insights as well. But the highest percentage of purchase behaviors initiated by mail by age group was actually the 17 to 24-year-old category, which marketers will know very, very difficult to target and get them to respond. But it seems if you send them a letter, it's something that is out of the ordinary for a digital world and a digital age group. It can actually drive something different and build a brand relationship that perhaps they just would not have seen in the crowded Instagram and TikTok space.
Yeah, just jumping in there, Christopher. Yeah, absolutely. The richness of the data, I think, is really important. And actually, unlike other JICs, the JICmail methodology is capturing almost more than simply the counts of the audience, more than simply those outputs. So typically those rating points on TV would just simply tell you, will count the audience to a program or an advertising break. But as Christopher explained, we've got these secondary actions, what happens next after exposure. And so we've got these really rich patterns across this funnel of interaction for brands that really then challenges some of the stereotypes as well about direct mail. So, mail is simply a response medium, for example. Well, our data proves actually it does a number of things really well. So we'll come on to talk about time spent and so on, but which really kind of embellishes that picture even more. But I think that fundamental need for actually moving it from a volume-based channel, how many mailers are we sending, into a count of actually how many interactions do we generate in households physically, is has been transformative. So even that one step has meant that we know that your typical million mailer for direct mail will be interacted with about 4.5 times. So actually that will generate 4.5 million impressions. Now that impressions count is equivalent to these audience counts in other channels. So hence just trying to show that actually just the method, one step in the methodology is a fundamental step, gives us these comparisons, and money is transacted on that basis. So all the other, in the 30 billion pounds worth that is the advertising marketplace, is being transacted based upon impressions. Mail wasn't part of that calculation, and it is now. And actually, by moving away from simply seeing yourself as a volume media into an audience channel, you've massively improved the cost efficiency of your performance. And then when you begin to go on to the next stage of the journey, how people then, what happens next with them? Do they talk about it? Do they go online? One of the fantastic effects we've picked up over the last 5 years, particularly given the disruption over COVID, is this growing kind of interaction with digital. So we've seen the levels of interaction with mail, physically around the home being remarkably consistent over the 5 years, but we've seen a growing level of commercial effectiveness coming from these subsequent actions. So and particularly going online. So it opens up a new opportunity for the actual channel. Is how can you unlock the value around that interaction, that interrelationship between the physical and the digital, for example. That's been vividly captured by our data, and we've put hard numbers on it. And actually, any advertiser looking at their challenge who is possibly not using mail as much as they should think twice, think more deeply, because there is untapped opportunity. So the completeness of our data, obviously it's contextual data as well. So it's the other thing we always try to say is take our data and integrate it with your own data. So when it comes to your own customer data, other data sources, we've taken our data set. It's really interesting in its own right, but it's even more powerful when you take it into your own data set. So integrating JICmail data is part of our mission. So we've taken it into standard research surveys such as TGI, taken it into some of these key planning tools like the IPA Touchpoints tool. We've had quite a few examples of taking it into more bespoke databases as well, and that will continue to grow. So creating this full picture through JICmail. And as Chris was saying, we kind of work, mail is punching above our weight in our data, and we're taking, in a sense, we're going further as a JIC on behalf of direct mail to really kind of leverage the full value as well.
Now, we've been talking a little bit here about effectiveness. So the effectiveness of direct mail or marketing mail, however you want to term it. What role does attention have in all of this? And how can you measure it? We've sort of hinted at this a little bit. So how do you actually measure attention?
So it's quite difficult. If measuring mail was a challenge,
if it were
then
easy,
measuring
somebody would have already done it.
Indeed. And I guess the industry, particularly marketing and comms parts of the industry, have been really kind of concerned about understanding attention over the last 2 or 3 years because of the digital fragmentation, the big challenge about actually within a digital environment, a screen-based environment, be it your laptop, be it your mobile, how much of your time is actually focused on the advertising. Because a lot of that, obviously, digital experience, you're consuming editorial, you're consuming other things. What about the advertising? And how on earth do you measure that? Particularly in the sheer bombardedness of everything. So that's where technologies such as eye tracking has come to the fore. So some companies have developed an approach that actually equip people with literally kind of glasses, which will track their eye movements in front of their laptop or their mobile. And so eye movements can then be plotted, and people can begin to see where the gaze is fixated upon. That becomes particularly, as we say, kind of concerning in this digital environment where you've got fractional seconds to grab that attention. And really that context of digital consumption is really challenging. How on earth can brands really engage and tell their stories in that fractions of seconds? So eye tracking was a way to try and add a layer of qualitative assessment on that basic exposure. And it also, in some of the methodologies, links then to further studies around, okay, well, if you grabbed high attention kind of environments, do they then drive active intention? Does that therefore drive effectiveness? And some of the work to date suggests that it does. So about 12 months ago, we at JICmail and working closely with Kantar went about, okay, what's the direct mail equivalent of this? Because obviously we're not screen based, and it's actually the experience of interacting with your mail in the home. That's our environment, that's our context. So we actually had a kind of 4 stages to it. One was simply to ask on a pilot study, and Christopher can jump in a bit more on it, supplementary questions. So we're currently on the app, when people pick up the items, they record that interaction. Well, in the pilot study, we then asked another question. Said, well, actually, how much time, how many seconds did you spend interacting with this item? And we were really keen that didn't overload our respondents, didn't actually ask too much of them, hence the pilot study. But actually, the results were very, very kind of encouraging. And we thought, okay, it can't just be our opinion. We also turned to PwC to validate this methodology and start to look at how our attention was scoring against some of these other channels. So we began to create a new measure of cost per attention. So mail seen as a high cost channel. Okay, how can you equate this high cost but rich time spent with mail? So our results, and I should say we've then been into another phase of rolling that out. And also checking it with some ethnographic research as well. So it's not just our own panelists. It's also a case of actually triangulating our data with other objective research. So we put 30 cameras in 30 households for a week, simply to film how they interacted with their mail, and another 2 households for a whole month, and then saw, actually from that observed data using AI video analytics, so using some high tech, was the behaviours that we were seeing in our panel replicated? And they were. So again, some of the time spent interacting with mail across a typical month, again, in a digital environment, you're talking about something just over a second. You're talking about almost 3 minutes for your business mail, 2 minutes for your advertising mail, and something over just under 50 seconds for a door drop. So that's what the kind of combination of our own methodology, validated by the ethnographic research, is coming out. And it makes sense because actually we all know we've got these richness of interactions that actually just accumulates time across the month. And actually it completely outscores and outperforms all these other channels in a digital environment, even against something like telly, which again has its own struggle for attention. Mail scores fantastically highly. So yeah. So we've actually come out with some pretty fundamental truths about the relationship of direct mail and attention, and it's a really strong story.
Yeah, I think it was a really interesting piece to help JICmail try and understand, because the assumption is mail would be a high attention media channel. Generally, as we've discussed previously, it's in the home for longer, much longer than a 15-second television ad, or in a clustered website with adverts everywhere. The idea that you're going to be focusing on anything other than that news article you're reading, it's going to be difficult to justify. So the assumption already being mail attention, is likely to be high. Being able to measure and prove that, potentially quite tricky. So I think starting with this idea of having a self-report measure using our existing panel, I think was a good starting point. But then I think particularly what added the value and therefore the kind of quantification of our data was being able to compare that to the in-home video analytics. So when we compared those 2 behaviors, they were giving us broadly similar times, but also adding in some kind of extra level of detail as well. As Mark said, we're measuring attention for even direct mail in minutes, not seconds, which if you compare across the full spectrum of all the other channels, again, is really giving direct mail that value. And then when we think about, how that will help the industry, it's just another tool in a growing toolkit in the UK for both advertisers and agencies to justify direct mail spend, and also for the posts as well. And they can use this data and leverage that in every pitch that they have. Defend their direct mail revenue, making sure that the marketplace is resilient to the challenges of digital media, and being able to prove that actually, in a cost per minute basis, direct mail is out competing things like television and press and even, website desktop display. I think it's going to be really interesting in the coming months and years as this data gets embedded fully in all those metrics to see, how advertisers and agencies respond. It's the current hot topic about, it's not just seeing an advert or even dwelling on an advert, interacting with it. And then obviously all of the subsequent commercial outcomes that we're seeing being driven by mail.
So I think that's the key thing really, is that we've got a unique capture of attention alongside these other metrics. So we've got another step on the journey. So a lot of these other channels are trying to hypothesize about, okay, what's the impact of high attention on things like effectiveness and so on. Well, we've now got a really strong fix around where it sits, because we've got all these steps towards some of these commercial actions. So it's going to be with us, I think, as a standard set of metrics. So we've embellished our core set of metrics with these attention metrics, and they are going to be really kind of powerful. But ultimately, it's about proving the value and effectiveness of mail. And I think the case is getting stronger.
I think you've also hit upon the idea for a hit TV show here. You know how there's Gogglebox, which shows people watching TV. You've got all this video footage of people opening their mail. You could have Goggle Mailbox. You heard it here first, everybody.
I like it.
If only we knew people who are connected to the media industry and marketing and all of that, we could perhaps get it up. Now, before we wrap up, there are probably plenty of people in and around the postal sector who might be quietly saying, we're talking about letter mail. Letters is a product that's in decline. Volumes have been in decline for years in all developed markets pretty much. Why should I care? Why, when I'm really focused on growing e-commerce or whatever other digital-based solution that you're offering through the post, why should we care about creating a more sophisticated analytics system around the effectiveness of mail?
It's a very good and important question, and I think the answer lies with actually that in order to, let's say, arrest the decline, certainly the kind of market-driven decline, you need to unlock the new capabilities of mail. You need to actually, in a very consumer-centric way, demonstrate the capabilities of mail in this new world. So whether that's retail, e-commerce, whether that's customer mail, whether that's in the financial sector, being obliged now in law in the UK with the new Consumer Duty Act coming into play in July, being obliged for consumers to better understand your product, then hey, turn to this data, because this data gives you the picture you need to create those new powerful stories supported by evidence that is objective, industry accepted by all sides, to make your case. So if you just stick to volumes, I suspect the decline will carry on. If you unlock the hidden capabilities of mail that you'd be confident about but have never been able to see before, use JICmail data to help you do that.
Yeah, I totally echo those points. I think the end goal is the need to help direct mail flourish commercially in a modern, crowded media world, by providing the industry with robust evidence that direct mail works. And if you advance that goal in your early stages and generate that evidence of how mail is used, its behavioral effects, and how it's leading to consumer action, then that first phase arms your sales teams with industry-beating reliable data on the impact of direct mail and how it can be used by your customers. And then from that point onwards, momentum builds, because as evidence and insight starts getting generated, it increases the consideration of direct mail usage. And then if you have that data then, as JICmail in the UK has done, embedded into media planning tools, the idea is that you want to make direct mail use effective, but also habitual. You want it considered as part of the full media package. And then the longer term strategy then obviously is establishing that currency measurement that means that the industry is making those decisions armed with audience measurement, specific targets, the knowledge, the reach and the conversion and all of those other metrics that they need can be obtained. And the value of that data then to media planners naturally flows back into increased direct mail revenues.
Mark, if people want to find out more about JICmail and the work that it's been doing, where should they go?
Please visit and spend time exploring www.jicmail.org.uk.
Or you can get somebody to print it out and post it to you. And then
Indeed. Download the many reports, insight reports we have and examples of good practice, and print them out and actually spend time with them.
And as we were discussing earlier, if this is a way to continue to emphasise the value of mail, especially in an environment where governments are continuing to mandate the universal service obligation, let's make the most of what we got. Christopher Thresher-Andrews from Kantar and Mark Cross from JICmail, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you very much.
Coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, our friends from Cardinal and Open Price will return to talk about some exciting news in the world of parcel pricing and route optimization. Also returning soon, our friend Helene Bouldeau-Rai, returning to talk about, being a good neighbour in the world of urban warehousing and stuff like that. Remember to subscribe to the Postal Hub podcast email newsletter. Go to thepostalhub.com and sign up there. Subscribe to all the same stuff, to the Daily Delivery Digest and to any other newsletter I've got going over there on thepostalhub.com. Remember to subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast platform so that you get each episode downloaded to the device of your choosing as it's released. If you want to contact me about anything at all, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.